So the findings that we share with you today will be made available in our upcoming report, State Adoption to District Implementation, Approaches and Strategies for Personalized Competency-Based Learning. The full report from Research for Action focuses on both the state and district levels, but for this webinar, we're going to be focusing on district implementation, and a separate webinar in early June on state adoption of personalized competency-based learning is scheduled for June 1st. So something else to keep in mind. This research has been in partnership with Research for Action and KnowledgeWorks, and I think everybody on the call is very familiar with KnowledgeWorks and their work in this space. And it's funded by the Leon Lowenstein Foundation, which supports a wide range of projects nationwide, including in areas of education, health, and the environment. So very thankful for their generous funding. The next slide. Great. So Research for Action is a Philadelphia-based education research and evaluation nonprofit organization with over 30 years of experience in education policy and practice research. And RFA partnered with KnowledgeWorks to document and analyze how personalized competency-based learning is taking hold in 4 states: Arizona, Nevada, North Dakota, and South Carolina, and the initial cohort of school districts implementing the work in 3 of these states: Arizona, North Dakota, and South Carolina. For the purposes of this discussion, we're going to use a KnowledgeWorks definition of personalized competency-based learning as an approach that centers on each student's strengths, needs, and interests, and provides differentiated supports and ways to demonstrate what they know and know how to do, ensuring that each learner graduates ready for what's next. The research team and KnowledgeWorks on this project established 3 goals for the study at the outset. The first goal was to document approaches and lessons learned from policy adoption and implementation of personalized competency-based learning in the 4 study states. The second goal was to identify how the COVID-19 pandemic impacted the move towards personalized competency-based learning in each study state. And then primarily at the state level, the third goal is to identify how states define and operationalize its equity commitment within the state's personalized competency-based learning efforts. The research aims to directly support and inform states and districts already utilizing personalized competency-based learning, as well as others considering similar efforts. The study was informed by an array of qualitative sources from the study states and districts, including document review, policy scans, and interviews with state and district level respondents. And for any of you who participated in those interviews who are on this webinar, we thank you so much for your contribution. In each of the study states, RFA conducted interviews with a total of 4 respondents across the district, school, and classroom levels in the summer and fall of 2021. And the study identified a sample of 2 districts in 3 study states implementing personalized competency-based learning at the district level in Arizona, North Dakota, and South Carolina. Also, to inform this research over the life of the project, Research for Action recruited points of contact at the state and district levels to serve on the Research Advisory Committee, or the RAC. The RAC members provided feedback at critical intervals in the study, reviewing research questions and dissemination plans, data collection instruments, and the analysis used to develop this PowerPoint and our overall report. And we really want to again say thank you to all the people who took part in the interviews, and especially to the Research Advisory Committee, 2 of whose members are joining us today, Eric Brooks and Angie Rye. And very thankful for all the Research Advisory Committee members and their work. Should we go to the next slide? Great. So our agenda for today is packed, a lot of things to talk about. So we want to dive in as soon as we can, but just to kind of go over what our plans are for the next hour. Our agenda includes the following activities and discussion topics. We'll do an introduction of the presenters and panelists who are on the webinar. And then we'll go into some findings and a structured discussion with panelists focusing on a number of different topics, including district motivation for adopting personalized competency-based learning, district level system change in support of this effort, capacity building strategies that have been seen as promising practices to support this work, some common successes that we identified, in the implementation of personalized competency-based learning, the influence of COVID-19 or the interaction with COVID-19 and personalized competency-based learning. And then we'll talk about resources and additional resource needs to support the work. Then we're going to pause and spend some time on any questions that you all have, followed by recommendations and then some closing thoughts. During the webinar, if you see at the bottom of your screen, you might need to scroll to the bottom of the screen, but there's a Q&A option just to the left of the chat. It's between participants and chat. And you can click there during the webinar and add any questions that you have in that Q&A, and we can discuss them during the question and discussion period during toward the end of our session. So we'll be talking through those at that point. Want to go to the next slide? Okay. So let's go ahead and get started by introducing our presenters and panelists. I'm Mark Duffy. I'm a senior research associate at Research for Action, and I've been the project director on this research partnership with KnowledgeWorks and Research for Action.
Hi, my name is Mary Eddins. I am a policy associate at Research for Action, and my role for this research study was project manager. Now I'll pass it over to Eric.
Good morning. I am Eric Brooks. I have the honor and privilege of serving as the Chief Academic Officer in the Yuma Union High School District. A little bit about myself in the district. I've been there for 6 years, although we often laugh and say that that's kind of a misnomer because prior to coming to the district, I worked at the Department of Education, and this was one of my favorite districts to work in. And so when I was offered the dream job of actually leaving the Department of Ed and actually working in a district, this was the district that I got to work in. So I've been doing work with this district since about 2009. So it's been an absolutely wonderful journey. Our district is about 11,500 students. We serve grades 9 through 12, so we are strictly a high school district. We have about 5 different elementary districts who feed into our 6, soon to be 7 high schools. We started the competency-based journey, competency-based learning journey in 2019. So 2019, 2020 school year, that's when we started our journey. And then, if I were to characterize our kind of implementation strategy, it's always, we constantly say to each other, we go slow to move fast. We're kind of always mindful of the pace because each step that we take and everything we do impacts our system, but most importantly, it impacts our students, our teachers, and our parents. And so we're very cognizant, very thoughtful as we take each action so that all parties can go along the journey in a meaningful and wonderful way. And I'll turn it to Angie.
Thanks, Eric. I'm Angie Rye, and I'm Chief Academic Officer in Lexington School District 3. We serve a small rural community right outside of Columbia, South Carolina, which is the capital, kind of in the middle of our little small state. And our district serves about 2,008 students. We do have 4 schools. We serve K-4 through 12th grade, as well as adult education and all of the extra services that districts provide across the nation. We started our personalized competency-based learning journey in the 2018-19 school year. We participated initially in some cohort sessions that the State Department of Education provided around personalized learning and just trying to get people introduced to the concept. And we started with school level teams that were comprised of some teacher leaders, and that kind of helped us to start the scaling and spreading process that we're currently in now. And of course, part of that wonderful cohort was the opportunity to work with Robin and Brenda, who are with KnowledgeWorks, and they kind of we bonded immediately with them, and they got our district and understood some of our needs immediately. And we shifted away from some of the work with the State Department, and we're consulting with Robin and Brenda directly through KnowledgeWorks for a couple of years before the pandemic began. And then we continued that, and I know we'll get to that piece of the journey a little bit later. One of the other things that I'll just mention is that we have had the opportunity, of course, through this RFA process to kind of take a step back and do some reflection of the journey. Part of the research process was being able to be part of those interviews. And I think that really helped me to get a really good assessment of where we are at. Sometimes you forget some of the steps along the way. And I love Eric's analysis of going slow to go fast. Eric, we might have the same brain because I have actually said those very same words. And I think it's really important that you take time to step back and take a look at where you're at and then where you want to go next. And that's been part of the benefit of being part of this study this year.
Great. So thanks again so much to Eric and Angie for being in this webinar and for in advance for sharing your perspectives. Let me also just say that we did have a third panelist for the webinar from Oaks, North Dakota, who ended up having a last minute conflict and isn't able to participate. But thank you again so much for all of our participants and our panelists. So why don't we go ahead and get started with some findings and discussion. So first we wanted to talk about district motivations for the adoption of personalized competency-based learning. Kind of, how did districts decide to move in this direction? And it's important to understand these motivations that lead districts to adopt really a whole school and complex effort like personalized competency-based learning. And multiple districts across our study states identified the following motivations. First, people really spoke about this being kind of a continuous journey based on previous work or existing interests that they had aligned with personalized competency-based learning. 3 of the 6 study districts reported that personalized competency-based learning was something that, quote, they already really wanted to do, or had started to implement through aligned policies around student-centered approach prior to the adoption of the effort with KnowledgeWorks. Individual teachers also identified a real personal alignment between personalized competency-based learning and their prior teaching philosophies and practices, focusing on a student-centered approach. Second, there was really a focus on preparation for graduation and college and career, and seeing personalized competency-based learning as a way to get there. As was the case at the state level, districts identified personalized competency-based learning as a strategy to help students graduate and really prepare them for the world after high school. In terms of a final motivation, external site visits and observations were identified again and again as a real way to encourage district adoption of this type of work. Observations of teachers in other districts, whether inside or outside the state, can really act as a powerful motivator for district and classroom adoption of personalized competency-based learning. So for example, both of the districts in Arizona identified that kind of external visit as a catalyst for improvement. So I just want to pause for a second and see, if this is ringing true for the panel, and kind of what motivations you would identify as, the impetus for your district getting involved, and are there any other motivations that you want to mention?
I'll go first since Eric gave me the nod. We're fortunate in South Carolina, we have a profile of the South Carolina graduate, and I know a lot of states have something similar, and that was sort of the driving force and still is the driving force for us in terms of all of our strategic planning. If we can't pair it back to that profile as a reason for why we do what we do, then we don't do it. And the personalized competency-based learning model just fits right into the profile. We're trying to prepare students to go into a workplace that has those skill sets and that knowledge. And we feel like this fits with what we're doing. And the capacity, I completely agree with the capacity to do the external visits, not only with what we were seeing in our own classrooms, but we've had the benefit of going both to Marysville, Ohio and Kettle Moraine, Wisconsin, where they are deeply embedded in this work and just a couple of steps ahead of where we are as a district. And that has helped us tremendously to involve some of our staff so that they can see where we're going and come back and help us shape that vision within our own staff.
So the sitting before me is a placard that we have in our district that sits right at my desk, right is everything I do. And it says, every student, college, career, and community prepared. And that guides all of our work. And so this became a really natural piece for us because we had what we called before something that was similar to a portrait of a graduate earlier on. It was our Ready Now Yuma work. And it was work that we were doing where we actually identified to stakeholders into our community our desire to work with every student. We had extremely strong CTE programs, career and tech ed programs. We also have we've adopted a very rigorous Cambridge curriculum for all of our students. So all of our students at the 9th and 10th grade level take Cambridge courses in an effort to make sure that we challenge their critical thinking skills and prepare them for our enormous amount of dual credit offerings in their junior and senior year, and also AP offerings. So in doing that, we have been in a world where we've always been creating pathways for students to be successful. And as you create pathways for students to be successful, the conversation in regards to individualized, it goes from individualized, what do I want to do, to how can I show you, chemistry teacher, mastery of the periodic table and things of that nature. So we really have been set up for this particular work. And we're very fortunate. Our associate superintendent, who was amazing, took a trip to Maryvale, as my good colleague Angie kind of illuminated. She took a trip to Maryvale and came back, was incredibly excited about the work and said, this is our next level of work. This is what we need to be spending our time doing. And so similar to what Angie said, we were able to get in a room with other districts who participate in Arizona in this. So there are 3 other districts besides ourselves who participate. And it is amazing the amount of learning and the amount of collaboration that takes place, not only in our district, but outside the 4 walls of our district to our, we call them our convenings. And so to those, whether they were virtual or whether they were in person, and of course we started out in person with our convenings, you had a number of different colleagues now across the state from a variety of different districts who share in this journey. And so that's been extremely, extremely helpful. And it's been what's motivated us to continue on this path as we continue learning.
Great. Okay. So I think, Mary, you're going to tell us a little bit about systems change.
All right. Thank you all. So I have the pleasure of sharing some of the system change that we learned about through the study. So to successfully implement personalized competency-based learning across classrooms, it really is essential to build district systems and policies that do in fact support the work. Common system level changes were found across multiple districts within the study and are highlighted here on this slide. So first, districts examined learning progressions and priority standards. Educators are working on unpacking the state academic standards to identify priority standards and learning progressions, or in other words, how standards build upon each other to allow for deeper learning so that they can better track student progress against the standards themselves. Districts are also revising or restructuring teacher evaluation systems, specifically revising those systems to align with personalized competency-based learning. In one district, they will be modifying their evaluation tool to reflect personalized competency-based learning look-fors in the classroom. And 2 of the districts are implementing the Marzano evaluation method, which is already considered to be aligned with personalized competency-based learning. And then lastly, districts have also examined grading systems and specifically moved to adopt standards-based grading. All but one of the study districts are adopting standards-based grading, which is a system that evaluates students' progress towards mastering learning targets. In some cases, this process had already begun before official implementation of personalized competency-based learning. So something districts were already doing and aligned very well with the initiative. So now to the panel. The next question we have for you is, why would you say that district policy change is important to supporting and implementing personalized competency-based learning?
Okay. All right. I will take this one. Thank you, Angie, for the nod. One of the great things about our district is that we have a very strong teaching and learning team, and that teaching and learning team really spends a lot of time looking at a variety of different aspects of the work that needs to be done. And we then, as a district teaching and learning team, kind of make some decisions. And the great thing about our lives is that those decisions are not made simply with us. Our district teaching and learning team then fields out to and gets input from all of our teacher leaders, all of our different campus leaders, our campus leadership. They all have input in regards to the things that are done. But it's important to have district policy change because policy oftentimes, more often than not, dictates how people behave. And so you can have a lot of, it would be really great if you did this, or we suggest you do that. But once people see things in black and white and see that it's a policy and see that there's a shift, people's behavior shift when they see things in writing, or people's behavior shift when they hear you constantly talk about, here's the way that we're going to do business. So great examples of that are, we have a really strong redo retake policy. We've talked about it for a number of years, but once it became, once our board approved it and it became something that we constantly spoke about, something that we constantly did, it was in our manuals and all of those sorts of things, then people really started to kind of fall in line and make sure it happened. So that's just one example of why it's so important to change district policy, because once you change district policy, teachers who don't have access to various tables that leaders have know your vision and know what you think is important, and then they can fall in line with that.
I'll add to what Eric said, and the converse of that, when you don't have a large staff and you're in a smaller district like I am, you have to really rely on building that leadership from the ground up. And so that is why our teacher leader teams have been so critical, but also our admin teams. And when you're thinking about district policy in a district where, in his case, you only have high schools, or in our case, we only have 4 schools, you've got to figure out ways where you can provide that consistency across those schools. And that's why the policy change becomes so important, so that all 4 administrative teams, or all of the teams that you're working with within your district, have that same level of support, and they have in black and white what it is that is being expected. I would also say one of the things that has really helped us is that having those folks invested so highly in the work has allowed me to make sure that they're removing any obstacles or providing all of the support and resources that their teacher teams, that their school level teams are going to need in order to put the policies, or to put competency-based personalized learning in place. We're very fortunate also in South Carolina to have a teacher evaluation model that was revamped in recent years, and it really reflects the NIET rubric for teaching. So everything that we are trying to do within our personalized competency-based learning is also reflected in what teachers are supposed to be doing daily as part of their teaching and learning in their classrooms. And so that has helped us not only as a district policy, but here's a state level expectation that you're supposed to be striving for each day. And we use that to reinforce the practices that are good for kids.
Thank you both for sharing those perspectives. I'm going to pass it now to Mark to talk through building capacity.
Yeah, so of course, such a huge part of this work is doing the capacity building so that this can actually be implemented at the classroom level. And personalized learning is just a really complex instructional and systems approach that influences the roles of both teachers and students in the classroom and changes the way learning happens, which is really exciting. So in order for this level of instructional change to take place, educators need both the knowledge of the approach and structures to support them in that work. And so we identified a number of common strategies across districts to build this capacity, which include the following. So first, sharing learning from convenings. So there were a number of collaborative convenings or meetings that were hosted by the state, hosted by KnowledgeWorks, in some cases hosted by districts, but of course not everybody can attend those. They focused on professional development and networking, and were the most common form of capacity building. So in many cases, a subset of school and district administrators and faculty often attended those convenings, and then they reported back to their peers on what they had learned, so that the larger portion of the faculty and administration teams would be aware of what was being shared. In other cases, the groups of educators representing the district at convenings rotated, so that you'd have a portion of the district attending maybe a fall convening and then a different portion attending a spring convening, so that you know, really just trying to figure out different ways to disseminate the information. As we've already talked about a little bit, providing opportunities for internal or external classroom observations seems to be so key to this work, and common you know, across many districts, and identified as particularly effective as a way to really help to implement personalized competency-based learning, whether the observations happen inside or outside the home district or state. In some cases, study districts hosted opportunities for teachers from within their districts, as well as other districts to come and observe their classrooms. Educators also engaged in external site visits, as was mentioned, in districts in other states. So just observations again and again came up in our research as a critical tool. Angie was just mentioning recruiting teacher leaders to adopt personalized competency-based learning in their classrooms, and also to model the work and support their peers, which is something that we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. But several districts are using varying versions of this work to leverage teachers through kind of a train the trainer approach, by recruiting a group of teachers to help lead this work and disseminate information. There are also some practices involving offering problems of practice or study sessions as a way to build capacity. So 2 of our districts reported utilizing a book study approach to orient educators to personalized competency-based learning. In one of the districts, a group of principals and assistant principals were meeting on a monthly basis to discuss personalized learning and build their instructional leadership for this effort. In another, sessions focused on problems of practice, which could be a number of different instructional you know, reforms or, you know, directions, including implementing personalized concept-based learning, was a regular practice where faculty could come and say, you know, I'm working on this, and get some feedback from their peers about potential promising practices. Of course, human and material resources are really important for capacity building. Ongoing support through both were identified as effective ways to build capacity for implementation as well. So in terms of human resources, in one district, they actually employed an instructional coach who's focusing on personalized competency-based learning to provide support and feedback on classroom implementation. And that was identified as an effective strategy for building teacher capacity. Similarly, another district is actually creating a project manager position for personalized competency-based learning to support activities that support the work, such as data collection. So a couple different opportunities to really leverage you know, people power to support this work. And then, of course, you know, teachers you know, often use material resources, and so district leaders are also developing instructional resources, such as a resource bank of personalized competency-based learning materials that can, you know, help to you know, build those lesson plans for teachers, and also sharing training modules that have already been developed by KnowledgeWorks and customizing them for the particular district context. Another interesting strategy that I think is worth keeping in mind is just leveraging existing meeting structures instead of recreating the wheel. So, you know, although along with offering new professional development opportunities, districts also used existing meeting structures like common planning time to build knowledge around personalized competency-based learning. So for example, in one district, the curriculum coordinators share what they learn during regular curriculum meetings with teachers, and then the teacher representatives from that group go back and share that back in their buildings during their professional learning community. So it's just important to identify some strategies to disseminate all of this information about personalized competency-based learning. Can we go to the next slide? Great. So there were a few promising practices that we identified that we wanted to highlight for you around building capacity. And so I'll turn it over to Eric to talk about district design teams and school level work in Yuma.
All right. Now it's my turn to give the shout out to KnowledgeWorks and the Center for the Future of Arizona here in our state, who've really been working alongside of us, specifically Robin Kanan and Brendan Neal, who is our coach. So with KnowledgeWorks, you have a coach who kind of works alongside of you and kind of takes you through this journey. And so our district design team meetings are really an opportunity for our 7 principals to work alongside our teaching and learning team, again, in the presence of Brenda Neal, our Knowledge Works coach, and also some coaches from the Center for the Future of Arizona. All of us gather in a room twice a month to spend time talking about the work. And it's a lot of what Mark just alluded to. It's talking specifically about the work that we're doing around Knowledge Works, but also an added feature is we make sure we talk about the work that's being done that may not directly be related to Knowledge Works. So that way we can show how all of our work is tied in together. And so with our Knowledge Works coach there, when we say we have such and such event coming up, we all then kind of think about and reflect on ways that, oh, wow, and that's another example of personalized learning, or this is where if you were to tweak it just this way, you could have it be more reflective of your personalized learning journey. If you did that now, here's what it could look like 6 months from now. And so those meetings have been absolutely wonderful. We have our Director of Strategic Partnerships, who has done a phenomenal job of all the work with the Portrait of a Graduate. And so though that information and that data is brought into those meetings, we have our Director of Learning Management Systems and who brings in information on all the work that she's doing in our district with individual schools around standards-based grading. So that particular space every 2 weeks really gives us the opportunity to spend a lot of time talking about all the things that we do. And it allows us to continually keep the vision forward, keep personalized learning and PCBL forefront in our mind, and to make sure and to try to find different ways to make sure we're connecting the work for ourselves as leaders. But then most importantly, once we're done as leaders doing the connection of that work, making sure that those we work alongside of are making those connections on their campuses, in their department meetings and things of that nature. So it's really been just a wonderful opportunity for us to stay focused on that work and to provide opportunities for all of us to have input and actually to own the work that we do.
Great. Okay. So I wanted to share a little bit. The panelist who wasn't able to join us today is actually the personalized learning and instructional coach in Oaks, North Dakota. And I had mentioned this a little bit before, but he really provides customized support for and feedback on classroom implementation of personalized learning on a daily basis. He's in the schools now. It's a small district. I'm pretty sure it's a single building district, but he's able to, which is a contextual piece that it's important to recognize, that may be facilitated more easily in a small district. But at the same time, he's meeting with teachers on a regular basis. He's doing observations. He's providing real-time feedback that's really customized to the questions that individual teachers are asking. And a lot of interview respondents from that district identified this as a really effective strategy for building teacher capacity so that you can work one-on-one with teachers and provide that kind of ongoing support. Of course, the professional development initially is critical, but that ongoing support piece in the form of an instructional coach, we identified as a promising practices that might be considered in other districts.
I will conclude by maybe sharing a little bit different perspective, but very similar to what has already been shared by both of the other districts. We have had the opportunity to work with Knowledge Works as well, as I mentioned before. And this year, the state of South Carolina implemented or chose some districts in our state that have been doing this work as lighthouse districts for personalized learning. And we have been fortunate to be chosen as one of those districts. And as a result of that, it has kind of given us even more unlimited access to our Knowledge Works friends and to some support and resources that they're able to provide. But it also gives us, as Eric has mentioned several times, the opportunity to have convenings and share sessions with other districts who are doing this work as well. But I think one of the biggest things for us as a district has just been having that teacher leader cadre that has also included instructional coaches. And I'll say again, we've heavily invested in our school administrators because we're so small. Without them, this work cannot move forward. And so we've tried to kind of have tight, loose mentality about it. There's some things that we really want everybody to be working towards. We're working right now on some tenets that we hope to share with our entire staff at the outset of next school year. But at the same time, we want our teachers to feel empowered to try some things in their own classrooms, to do things that will meet the needs of their kids and that work for them. And so we haven't said you all have to implement data notebooks, or you all have to implement, certain facets of what we might consider personalized learning. And I think that that's what is making it work so well for us. We have provided a tremendous amount of support sessions with the help of Robin and Brenda. I basically get on with them about every 2 weeks for a check-in and a planning session, personally for myself as a district leader. And then we also do the same with our school level leaders. That includes our instructional coaches, so that we are planning the professional development and the support that folks need at the school level. But at the same time, we've really, the last couple of years, tried to put a lot of emphasis in the choice of that for teachers, so that they're getting what they need, and so that they're developing in the same way we want them to develop student agency. We're trying to develop teacher agency, that the personalized competency-based learning that they're implementing in their classroom meets their needs as well. And so I think that's what has really made what we do with the teacher leader piece so critical, but also so effective.
Great. Okay. So I think, Mary, you're going to take the next slide.
Yeah. So I have the pleasure of being able to share some of the common successes that we learned with this study. So while there certainly have been some challenges associated with implementation, such as just trying to find enough time for teachers to engage in required professional development, there have also been a number of common successes reported by districts that they were already experiencing within their current stages of implementation of personalized competency-based learning. So first, districts are already seeing increased student engagement. Nearly all of the districts reported that students are more engaged in the classroom as a result of personalized competency-based learning. There was also some anecdotal evidence that students are better behaved, in part because there's more personalized relationships with their teachers. Second, and also very student-centered, districts reported greater student agency. So through efforts to encourage student voice and choice in both the ways that students learn and the ways that they demonstrate their learning, or through student assessments, student agency has increased across all districts. And then lastly, student ownership of their own learning is increasing. So district respondents also reported that students are better aware of how they are performing against the standards and what they need to learn to make progress against those standards as well. And students are able to articulate their learning goals in a very clear and specific way. So now to the panel. What are other successes that you would point to at the school and district levels?
I'll start this one. Well, I think, just to reiterate some of these points, one of the biggest things that we are starting to see is that progression build across all grades. So as our kids move through our system, they go from one school to the next school, all the way from K4 through the 12th grade. And it's been really exciting to watch kids in our primary school be able to talk about what they're learning and whether or not they're able to show mastery or competency for certain skills, and then move through the system into higher grades and do the same thing, but to watch that mature and become grade appropriate for them as they do that, so that by the time they get to the high school, they're really talking more about competencies and being able to relate that to what that's going to look like when they go either to work or to college or wherever their post-secondary goals might take them. I think that's probably the most exciting part. And that's something that's very subjective, and there's no real data point that you necessarily get for that, but it certainly is a real celebration for us. I would also say that just through our own informal walkthroughs and collection of what we see in classrooms, and fortunately, because COVID is improved and we've been able to get back in classrooms and schools collectively together, we're able to start our instructional rounds process again. We're able to go in and actually see the evidence of implementation for 2 years, it feels like we've just been listening to teachers talk about what they're doing, and a principal may have been able to go in and see some of that evidence. But now, collectively, our system is starting to see more of that, and we've been able to share more of that just through some technology tools and some capacity that we learned through COVID as a result of being able to do Google Meet and some of those other things. So it's been exciting to see that we are scaling and spreading what we had hoped to set out to do.
I will piggyback on what Angie was saying in regards to the fact that I think some of the real great successes you see is first from the adults, them being able to really clearly define their expectations. We have a number of different different spaces that are created that are called collaborations. And what they basically do is allow, if you teach Math 100, we're going to have you come into the room on this day for a full day. And everyone who teaches Math 100 across our district is in the room, and they're spending time working on proficiency scales, unit assessments. They're talking about the various ways that they've allowed students to demonstrate mastery. And so by them doing that, it then provides more options and more opportunities for students to be able to articulate. So one of the great things that Angie alluded to, which I so appreciate, is we now see students saying, you know, I know really what this means. You're asking me to write a paper, and that's going to be really difficult for me to do. But if you don't mind, I can create a play that shows how this person and this character interplays with this. And I'll even take it a step further. I'll create a whole new ending for the book, because by doing that, that can show you how that shows you how I understand the book and I'm comprehending the book. And it gives me a creative outlet to make sure that I do that. And as the teacher, as a student is articulating that to the teacher, what we're so proud of is the fact that, again, getting back to our every student college career and community prepared, wherever their next steps are, however they define community, they will be able to take that same skill set as being able to articulate and advocate for themselves into that environment. And hopefully have as a receptive supervisor, a receptive person on the other end who's willing to say, okay, I see you want to try to do this differently. And just being able to look at a problem, reflect on it, critically think about it, and then kind of say, here's how I'd like to accomplish that. Also, students being able to articulate their prowess and to say, you know, according to the rubric that's defined here, you said if I did this, that, and the other thing, this would allow me to get such and such grade. Well, let me show you how I feel that this captures that. I feel that this captures this. And so I'm pretty comfortable in the fact that I should be receiving a B on this particular, or I should be a 3, which is proficient in the standards-based grading world, because according to the rubric, here's what they're looking for, and here's what I'm able to provide. So just being able to watch students navigate that world, and it's not, of course, every single student all the time, but it's exciting to see when it does happen, and it's exciting to see our teachers helping students be able to learn to navigate those worlds. And that all stems from the idea of personalized and competency-based learning.
So COVID, of course, has significantly impacted the world as we know it, including teaching and learning across the country. And the interaction between the pandemic and personalized competency-based learning also changed education in the study districts in several common ways. First, there was really broad consensus that personalized competency-based learning helped implementing schools and districts adapt more quickly during the pandemic than perhaps other places that were not implementing personalized competency-based learning. Participation in the effort prepared educators for the changes needed in providing remote instruction and helped them pivot to provide personalized instruction to meet the individual needs of students. In one district, for example, the learning management system was leveraged to support personalized learning efforts during the height of the pandemic and has been continuing to be utilized in new ways. Second, the pandemic sparked interest in personalized competency-based learning due to the student-centered approach in addressing learning needs and environments created by the pandemic itself. The pandemic sparked really a mindset shift in educators to reconsider how to best serve students. And then lastly, the pandemic slowed implementation, professional development, and scaling. while personalized competency-based learning was certainly elevated in different ways during the pandemic, the need to directly respond to the pandemic shifted the focus of schools and districts already involved in the effort as well. Oftentimes, the pandemic limited professional development opportunities, and teacher illnesses required colleagues to cover for one another's classrooms instead of being able to take advantage of their regular prep time. And so there were some positives and some negatives that were identified. I wonder, if just briefly, if there's anything, Angie or Eric, you want to add to the ways in which you think COVID-19 influenced implementation in your districts.
I can start this time. Definitely, it influenced our district in a number of ways. I'll take the silver lining approach and just kind of say it has really helped us get more comfortable in regards to putting everything on our learning management system, which is Canvas. And so now everything we do is really housed there. And anytime we come up with some, we were in a meeting yesterday talking about wanting to make sure we shared certain information out. And we said, okay, we'll definitely put that on Canvas, and teachers are automatically going there to get information. Students are automatically going there to get information. So are our parents and our community. So that really, because of the fact that there was no other way to make sure we communicate, or we discovered that was our best way. And we have a very, very strong director of educational technology, learning management systems, who really helped us navigate those paths. Because of that, some teachers who are very apprehensive and some kids who in certain classes weren't used to using Canvas, all of them now, for the most part, are very used to using Canvas in a variety of ways. And so it's allowed students to feel confident that if they have to miss a day of work because I have to help my grandmother get to the doctor, or they have to miss a day of school because I have to help my grandmother get to the doctor, or I'm not feeling really well today and I'm not sure what this is, it allows them the opportunity to be confident that even if they're not physically present in front of the teacher, they know what's taking place in class because our teachers have really strong Canvas pages, and our leadership spends time making sure that that's something that we keep up to date. So that way kids don't miss learning. They might miss being present in school, but they certainly don't miss the learning that should be taking place.
For us, it has kind of been a twofold thing. One is it really changed how we worked professionally within our groups of teachers. At the outset in the spring of 2020, we were already sort of working towards some PD days. Robin and Brenda were scheduled to come to our district in June, and we were going to have face-to-face sessions where our teachers built out their learning progressions and worked on some priority standards and started the work around pre-assessments. And then, obviously we shut down and the whole world stopped, and we had a lot of time on our hands. And after much conversation and checking in with Robin and Brenda and just talking about what are we going to do, and after we finished, kind of wrangling our hands, we determined that, hey, we do have a lot of time on our hands, and our teachers are a captive audience right now. So we started that work while they were working at home and our kids were at home. We had not at that point necessarily rolled devices out to every kid. And so we were limping along sort of to the finish line of that initial school year. Our teachers were doing PD sessions live with Robin and Brenda because they were under contract, and they started the work around priority standards and building out those progressions. And we continued that into June. And so while we weren't able to do it face to face, it actually turned out to be a very positive thing for us because we maximized our time virtually, and we got a lot of work done in that little short amount of space and time. And so we continued to use that format, and we're actually even still using that format this summer in some June PD days that we're scheduling in the coming weeks. It has given our teachers a great amount of flexibility for their own professional learning. You kind of talk about anytime, anywhere learning. Last summer, we had teachers tuning in from the beach and from their camper at a campground, but they value the work and they want to be part of it. And so they're doing it from wherever they might be. And so we've tried to continue to capture that flexibility for them. But I would also tell you that I think COVID really because our kids, and I hate the word learning loss, but because our kids suffered time away from us and a loss of instructional time, it has helped our teachers to really kind of dig deeper and have a greater lens for what their kids need. They're much more attuned to the data that we already had, but now new data that they are creating through their work in assessment. And for the last 2 years running, just through informal conversations, but also through some of the surveys and feedback that we're collecting from them, they are telling us that they know their kids better than they have ever known them in their whole teaching career. And this is coming from people who've been teaching for 25 plus years. And so I think COVID has really sort of almost pressed us forward into our personalized competency-based learning, because teachers recognize the need for it more due to COVID than they did previously.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's great. That there's some silver lining in this. So why don't we move ahead to the next slide? So in terms of resources, of course, district respondents identified a number of effective resources to support implementation that are already taking place to varying degrees. I mean, we've talked about classroom observations and reflection as a really important resource to support implementation. And I would just emphasize that reflection piece is critical, that peers have an opportunity to talk to each other after doing an observation and share the lessons that they're learning together. There's also ongoing technical assistance and instructional coaching that we've talked about that can happen in a few different ways, so that the support is really customized or personalized to the individual needs of district schools and teachers. KnowledgeWorks has provided that. Other staff at the district level have provided that. And then concentrated time to focus on personalized competency-based learning is also just really critical to the work. And we heard this again, time and again, that there just didn't seem to be quite enough time, both on a daily basis and in the long term, to learn more about personalized competency-based learning and to prepare to teach using that approach. Respondents explained that teachers really need time to create, time for conversations, and time to observe concrete examples of this work in the classroom. And this need for concrete examples, I think, is a bit of a challenge that came up in different interviews that could be addressed through perhaps the development of institutional or instructional resources or toolboxes with learning activities to implement in classrooms. This could also be provided through observations of classroom instruction and curricular materials that can be easily incorporated into lesson plans. So I just wonder, briefly, because I'm aware of time, we have about 5 minutes left, and we still want to take a couple questions, but just 30 seconds if Angie or Eric have any additional resources that you think are really needed to support the work that are not currently available.
I'll just say briefly that I don't think you can give them too much time to do this work. That is something that we have heard. We've participated in 2 other survey opportunities this year, and that has come out on all 3 opportunities we've been part of. And I'm a real big believer in connecting the dots too. So if you're giving them time, make sure you're connecting the dots for them on how to use that time, and that what you want them to work on specifically around PL, so that they're not thinking that you're doing separate things. I just can't emphasize that enough.
Yeah.
I'll just add to that real brief. From a district perspective or as a leader, you have access to a lot more knowledge in the 4 walls of your building. And sometimes your teachers only have knowledge of that. And so one of the great things is, to Angie's point about creating space, in those spaces, you could have things said like, hey, we're really struggling with that. And so as a principal, I know that Junie over at Gila Ridge, she does really well with this because at the last principals meeting, he was mentioning that. And so reach out to her. There are things that we as leaders know that not necessarily everyone else knows. And so creating that space where you can share that information and send your teachers to connect the dots with those folks is always extremely helpful.
Yeah. Okay. So we do want to get to the couple questions that are in our Q&A box. So Mary, I think you were going to take a look at those.
Yeah, definitely. We've been getting some questions from the audience. So for our panelists, Can you talk about parent and community communication to sell or support educational delivery and evaluation changes? I think this could also connect to just broadly, right? Like how have parents responded to personalized competency-based learning? And if you've had to kind of combat, any kind of that's not how I learned in school mentalities, maybe highlight that if you have any strategies or lessons there.
This is definitely an area of weakness for us. If there was an area that I could pinpoint we need to do a better job with, it would certainly be our communication with parents in our community. However, we have been using standards-based grading format at our K-2 schools, and we are working towards expanding that upwards. But our success story there is that our students are taking home a data notebook at that school, and in that are these student-friendly, parent-friendly documents that the teachers created from their progression documents. They're actually really cool, and the kids can all speak to them and articulate their own learning from these documents. And those go home twice a quarter. And we've had some real fun stories, kids sneaking them home on days when they weren't supposed to go home because they were so excited that they had mastered something and they wanted to be able to share that with their families. And so that is just kind of a little microcosm of where we have had some success with kind of shifting parents away from having a grade, but here's what my kid knows and can do. And we're hoping that starting small with our K-2 is going to allow us to expand that into our upper grades. We know high school will, of course, be the most challenging because of all the Carnegie credits and all of the things that go along with high school and graduation requirements. But we've been trying to learn a lot from our friends, again, in Kettle Moraine and Marysville, and some of the things that they have done and kind of stepped out ahead of some of the rest of us. And so hopefully we'll be able to expand that and include our parents and community in that process before we use it heavily and then get a lot of pushback.
I'd say one of my highlights of the week was being able to talk to some parents who were really struggling with the idea of the grade change and the fact that, schools are going to standards-based grading and things of that nature. And us as a teaching and learning team being able to say, we have 3 different measurements in regards to let us know, here's how your student is performing. And they heard it from the teacher, the department chair, the principal, and several of our teaching and learning team, all saying the same thing, like, here's the way we grade, here's what, here's how it happens, and here's where your son, in this particular case, here's where your son fell in regards to that. And the student himself being able to articulate the same words that we were saying. Now, his parents were not happy and we couldn't convince them otherwise, but the sheer fact that every person from student to our superintendent, all were saying the same things is just tantamount to the fact that, once you believe in something and you believe in the validity of standards-based grading and you're able to see the benefit of it, you can really start to move your system forward. So, and you're going to have to create a lot more spaces, a lot more often for parents to get accustomed to it. But certainly little by little, it can happen.
Thank you both. And as luck would have it, we actually got a Q&A question here that is what our last slide was going to be. So for sake of time, I'll just put that question out here. So for Eric and Angie, could you share either one key lesson learned or recommendation for districts that are just starting their journey or considering implementing personalized competency-based learning?
I'll take this one. So one of the big things is we learn the work by doing the work. And that's a that's a Richard Elmore quote that basically just talks about the fact that you have to, one of the things we've learned throughout this process is you have to continually take risk. You have to spend time talking about what happened. You have to reflect on it. And then you have to make really good decisions and think about the impact of how it's going to, think of the impact of what it means for, first and foremost, always at the center are your students, what it means for your students and their learning, and then what it means for all those others involved. How is it going to make their life better or different? And so when you consider that and you're mindful of pace, it kind of really helps you do this work or any other work that you do exceptionally well.
Do we have time for me, Mary? If not, it's okay.
Yeah, I think so, Angie. There'll be a recording. So if anybody has to
Okay.
hop off, we can share that.
Okay. I would just say one of the things, especially through some of the reflective opportunities that we've had in all of the surveys we've done this year, is just realizing that it's really hard for teachers to let go of some of what they have always known and some of the traditional practices that we've had. So when you're just getting started, recognizing that teachers are probably going to have a foot in both worlds. They're going to want to hold on to things that are comfort to them, but they're also going to want to innovate and try new things because obviously they're very much like their own learners and they want to please us as leaders. And so trying to help them find that balance, really trying to help take things off of their plate that will free time up or free up resources so that they can try new things is a critical piece of all of this. And again, to Eric's point that he's made several times, giving them lots of opportunities to share and learn from one another. It's great for you to have, State Department sessions or inquiry labs or visits to other schools, but some of our best resources come from within our own systems. And I don't think that we maximize that enough. So I would say, as my friend Eric said at the beginning, go slow to go fast. And just make sure that you're very cognizant that you're going to have, in the same way your teachers do, people all across the whole continuum in their classroom. In your school classrooms, your teachers are going to all be at different places on that continuum, and trying to be able to support them is going to be a challenge, but it's certainly possible.
Thank you. All right, so this will truly be a teaser for the report to come. So in the report that will be released soon, our study includes recommendations for both the state level and district level. So I won't go over these now, but we'll just hold this slide up for a moment. And like I said, know that they will be included and have more detail in the report itself. And then with that, I'd like to just say thank you once again to our panelists, Eric and Angie, for spending this portion of your afternoon with us and sharing your insight. Also would like to say thank you to KnowledgeWorks and the Lowenstein Foundation and all attendees present for today's webinar. Please stay tuned for the release of the full report and take care.